The first time I had the plants told us experience, I was with this woman shaman named Edna on the Amazon River in Brazil. And she said, I want to I want to do something for you. I want to read you. So she disappeared. She went out the back of her little shack and she came back with this little plant. And it was really small. It was this big and it had little roots coming off of it. And she held it by the stalk and she started touching me on the shoulders and head and doing a little chant. And then she stopped and she told me about a very specific problem I was having in my business. This was very specific. And I said to her, Edna, how do you know this? And she laughed and she said, I don't know it. The plant still has its roots. See?
Welcome to the Herbalist Hour. This is where community gather, merging the power of people and the flowers, the sweet and the bitter to the salty, the sour. Umami, it's time for the Herbalist Hour.
Welcome back to the Herbalist Hour. Today I'm incredibly honored and excited to welcome Chris Kilham to the show. Now, I have actually been linked up with Chris on LinkedIn for many years now, but this is our first time actually chatting. And I delved deep into your work this morning, Chris, and turns out I actually bought one of your books on kava a long time ago. So I've actually already kind of know who you are through that work as well. And then in preparation for this episode, I also watched this wonderful video on your YouTube channel. Let's see. It was called Down the Pharmaceutical Rabbit Hole.
Oh, good.
It was so mind-blowing, and it was just so affirming on so many levels, and it reinvigorated a passion of mine, I suppose, or a previous passion, which is chatting a little bit about psychedelics. So I do hope we're able to get into that today in the episode. But in the meantime, I would love to, before we get into all that, let's chat about your title as medicine hunter. What is a medicine hunter, and how did you become one?
Well, the first part is easy to answer. The second part is a little bit longer and more non-linear, let's say. But basically, I travel around the world investigating medicinal plants, working with indigenous people in Africa, Asia, Southeast Asia, Middle East, not so much in North America, but certainly throughout China and India and many places, all over Europe and the South Pacific. And I help companies to establish chains of trade. So I may go to explore particular plants in an area and come back with an idea of or connections to get plants that people cultivate or harvest in the wild to companies who want them to turn them into herbal supplements. And one of my roles is to make sure that this is done in a sustainable manner. And that not only means, good environmental practices, but wage practices, community involvement, that kind of thing. So that's what a medicine hunter is. In terms of how I got there, it was the most non-linear, non-planned thing ever. When I was 15, I wound up in Puerto Rico on a kind of a character building work project. Schools will do those sort of things. We were painting a church and I was in the jungle and I looked around and I said, wow, I want to be in places like this for the rest of my life. It just blew me away. And, I realized also that I wasn't particularly suited for sort of more conventional work, wound up working in the natural products industry, initially in co-ops and natural food stores, and became expert over time in medicinal plants. And then around 94, I was asked to be an herbal expert on a Chinese project going to northeastern China and possibly starting a ginseng business with a bunch of people. So I went and did that, had an amazingly great time. One of the people on the trip got really greedy and decided he was going to take the whole business. And so the thing didn't work out that way. But I came home and said to myself, gee, I could do this, I think, in a much more organized way and a little bit different than what other people who'd set this trip up had done. And just about as soon as I articulated that to myself, I got called by some people who started me on a journey with 10 years working with them. They were a large industrial botanical extraction company. And then another 11 years with a company that bought them, and then 6 more years with a company from India. And now I'm working with Berkem of France, who's a very, very fine outfit. So I've been in the supply side of botanicals for a long time. And basically, if you go to a store and you buy herbal products of different kinds, let's say an herbal formula, the odds are almost certain that the different ingredients in that formula all came from different companies. The superfood blend, that's going to come from so-and-so in California. And, the ginkgo extract, maybe that comes from some Swiss people, and on and on and on. So I'm in that area of the business and very, very fortunate to travel, to meet people all over the world, to spend time with shamans and herbalists and healers and other experts who I would not otherwise ever get to meet and learn from them. So it's really a pleasure and a privilege, and makes a contribution to what people wind up taking for themselves as herbal remedies.
Sounds like an incredibly fulfilling gig you got, as well as very adventurous. Looks like you have a lot of fun on the road. I'm curious about your herbal education background. Did you study formally, or were you learning from, say, the shamans and elsewhere on the land?
My study as a teenager was going into Chinatown in Boston, buying a ginseng root in an apothecary so they wouldn't throw me out, and I was looking at labels. I knew nothing. And there weren't as many, there certainly were academic books then that I didn't know anything about at the time. But in terms of popular books or easy access, there wasn't a lot. There were some things like Jethro Kloss and some other of the real standards. But basically, I learned a little bit from this person and a little bit from that person and this book and that book. And over time, that really accumulated into, if you will, a kind of an ad hoc curriculum. I did eventually wind up teaching ethnobotany at the University of Massachusetts for 14 years.
Wow.
As a visiting professor there. And that was entirely too much fun to have, whatever, 150 or so 20-year-olds just enjoying the whole ride. And I eventually took, for 3 years, I got tired of lecture teaching. And so for 3 years, I took students to the Amazon rainforest. And that had never been done at the university before. And that was really the highlight of that whole educational journey, taking them there to the forest, spending a couple of weeks in really rustic environments, in introducing them to shamans, hiking in the forest at all different times, including at night, being on some of the massive, massive rivers in the Amazon. It was a wonderful experience for them and for me.
Do you still lead tours for folks, or is it more personally like your work as, helping get herbal products to different companies?
I used to bring people down to the Amazon for ayahuasca ceremonies. And my wife and I did that for years. That was really a side thing. Work with botanicals for companies in the natural products industry. So these days, I haven't, brought people down or led any tours since before COVID. The last thing that I did prior to COVID was a 2-year, very intensive study of ayahuasca sustainability of the vine that's used to make this profoundly powerful Amazonian rainforest psychedelic medicine. So I haven't been there with a group for quite a while.
Okay. Well, I do want to delve further into ayahuasca. I'm very fascinated by that. I've actually never tried ayahuasca before, but before we get into that, why don't you tell us more about your work with, if I'm saying it correct, Groupe Berkem and the Global Plant Exploration Initiative?
Yeah, Berkem is
Berkem.
a kind of a high-end botanical extraction company in France. They've been around since the 70s. And um, I have been, just in the past few months, on their behalf repeatedly in France at some herbal farms there, in Norway, in Vietnam, kind of all over. And really, the company is very much on the move in terms of developing different new botanical extracts. And the whole Global Plant Initiative is a way of basically turning people's attention to the fact that we go to the field. You know, I've been in the field with a work partner, Nabil, for a lot over the past year or so. And this is not typical. You'd be surprised to know this, Winston. But as it turns out, a lot of companies, when they want herbs for products, they pick up the phone and they call somebody. And I'm not saying that everybody gets garbage if they do it that way. But what I am saying is you can't know enough about it. So we go to places, let's say like Dak Lak province in Vietnam, to investigate particular type of coffee there. And we go into the plantations, we meet the owners, we meet the people who harvest, we understand how the roasting's happening, you know, learn about the warehousing, the storage, the shipping, all of that stuff, in addition to eating insanely delicious Vietnamese food.
Oh, yeah.
And meeting wonderful, friendly people, you know. And then we bring that knowledge and all of that contact information and anything logistical that has to be figured out back to the company, and then other people take over to make the extracts that then go out all over the world to different companies who have supplements.
Just a quick break from the show to let you know about our HerbRally Schoolhouse, our private member area where, you know, HerbRally already comes out with a ton of free content, but if you'd like to get even more exclusive content, check out herbrally.com/schoolhouse. You could use coupon code SCHOOLHOUSE30 at checkout to get your first 30 days for free and see inside the member area. There's a ton of exclusive classes specifically for our members. There's herbal community discounts. There's a private member area where you could interact with the other members as well. Another perk is you get the ability to hang out with us live on the Herbalist Hour podcast. You could ask questions, etc. So that's a super fun perk, which we're really excited about. Huge shout out and thank you to all of our HerbRally Schoolhouse members. It's really one of the best ways you could support our work here at HerbRally. So thank you so much. And now back to the show. So Chris, I used to work for a company called Mountain Rose Herbs, and we had a position. Yeah, so we had a position there called procurement officer, and they were doing a lot of the type of stuff that you're talking about there. Is that kind of your role with Berkem?
Yeah, I don't actually place orders.
You don't?
No, I don't. But other people in the company do that after we go out and check the scene.
Gotcha.
So, you know, we typically will have, let's say, a driver, somebody who's in trade, maybe an additional photographer, perhaps a videographer. So we always have a little bit of a group going out there. I'm not just the Lone Ranger, you know, on my horse riding through the desert, standard in my hand. And it's really great. You get to meet a lot of capable, talented people that way.
Absolutely. So on your travels, we already kind of delved into it. You've done some, well, I want to say I heard you say you've done over 150 ayahuasca ceremonies. Maybe I'm way off on that number, but I would like to kind of delve into the topic of psychedelics, but kind of as a prerequisite before we get into that, I'm personally a fan. It's helped me out a lot with, like, say, PTSD and whatnot. Do you have any sort of like disclaimer that you like to give folks before, you know, chatting about this, like the safety of it, concern about, like, I don't know, overdosing, or people with, say, certain types of psychosis that doesn't allow them to partake in these psychedelic substances? Any sort of disclaimer you'd like to give?
Well, as a rule, I don't really spend that much time with disclaimers. And by the way, I accidentally called you Winston Mason.
That's all right.
I just like realized
You saw his name on the screen. It's all
like
good.
little brain thing kind of popped up. Wait a minute.
Happens to the best of us.
No, look, psychedelics, which basically are a class of different, plants and fungi. I'm talking about anyway. I'm not really talking about synthetics here, but we can broach that topic. They are uniquely revered in the cultures from which they derive. Morning glory seeds with the Southern Mexicans, big, big, big deal at the top of the pile of their mythos about plants and the cosmos. Magic mushrooms, the same thing in the mountains around Huautla, Mexico. Iboga, a powerful, powerful anti-addictive psychedelic from Central Africa that, interestingly enough, was had a compound derived from it for many years that was used to treat drug addiction in the United States, and ayahuasca from the Amazon rainforest. And I would say to this, we learned in the 60s that that is your mindset, and setting where you're doing this make all the difference in the world. There are people who go to psychedelics, especially to therapeutic milieus, who are having troubles. They're not necessarily in the best state of mind. They may have PTSD. They may have some form of mental difficulty that keeps them from having real joy in their lives, and maybe keeps them imbalanced as well. And those people often get tremendous relief, even resolution from those very difficult forces in their lives with psychedelics. You want to make sure that you have the good stuff, and we can talk more about that. You want to make sure that you're with good people in a pleasing environment where you're safe. You don't want to do this on the New York subway. No, you really don't. People have, and I've been fortunate to be involved with psychedelics one way or another since 1967. So I go a long way back with this, and I've seen all kinds of epochs. In general, if somebody's completely stark raving crazy, don't give them psychedelics. If you're in a really, really bad situation, don't do psychedelics. You have to pick and choose your tripping mates, your place, your state of mind. That's pretty much the disclaimer I'd give.
That's great advice. And the first time I ever did psychedelic mushrooms, I was probably like 17, and I was at my friend's house, and we were watching like stand-up comedy and stuff like that. And as I got older, I revered it much more and realized it's a very sacred thing to do, and that's probably not the best environment to be doing it. You should really treat these substances with high respect and have some sort of intentionality going into it. So yeah, I could double down on not doing it on the New York City subway. Not the best environment for trying these substances out. I've heard, I've never done ayahuasca, as I mentioned earlier, and I've heard of iboga or ibogaine before, and its effect on addiction and so on. I've never heard what the trip is like or how it helps with addiction. Do you have any insight as to why it's so effective for treating addiction?
Well, in general, what happens with psychedelics, and I want to define these for a minute.
Please. Yeah.
True psychedelic is something that is capable of producing a mystical experience. Okay? There are lots and lots and lots and lots of substances in the world that can get you high. They're not necessarily psychedelic at all. Psychedelics can induce, in the right situation, a truly, if albeit somewhat temporary, cosmic conscious experience of utter loss of self, dissolving into the infinite, feeling, to be possessed of pure, boundless love and gratitude for life and appreciation and compassion for all beings, all that stuff. That's what a psychedelic is. That is its potential. There are lots of things like MDMA and ketamine and other things that people use. They're not psychedelics, but they also can be helpful for people for different purposes. With regard to iboga, which is a root. It's used in Cameroon. It's used in some other countries in Africa. Virtually every psychedelic works in part, or to a great extent, by disrupting habitual neural patterns. If you, for example, go to your car by going out your kitchen, banging a left in the garage, walking 20 feet, putting your hand in, opening it up, you develop neural pathways for doing that so that that just becomes natural and easy and automatic, okay? That's great for common typical behaviors like getting into the shower or putting your clothes on or whatever, but it's not great for negative habits and patterns, addictions, traumas, adverse reactions to things for which there's really no justification to react that way. And what happens when you take psychedelics, and we know this from a lot of brain scans, is that thought in general in the frontal lobe of the brain tends to subside a bit while hundreds and hundreds of new neural pathways wind up springing up almost fountain-like. And this gives people broader behavioral and thought and emotional choices after the psychedelic event. So iboga is a true iboga ceremony can be 2 days. I would say if you really want to see something staggeringly beautiful in that regard, a guy named Bruce Perry did a series years ago called Going Tribal. This is a British special forces guy, really wonderful on camera, game for anything. And he participated in an iboga ceremony that was a 2-day ordeal, and it was really something to watch. But I think that the duration of it and kind of the trial by ordeal of it in that particular situation, in addition to the developing new neural pathways, sort of all add up to making it a profound anti-addictive agent.
Okay. So, with herbs, a lot of times we don't want to ascribe, say, take this herb for that. And I think I'm doing that right now with iboga, take iboga for addiction. And I guess I'm going to continue that trend right now, even though I'm not sure we should be talking about it in that particular way. But are there specific psychedelics that one should look into specifically for PTSD, in your opinion?
Well, we know that there are groups of veterans out there doing mushrooms together in retreat, bonding with their fellow veterans, and in many instances experiencing significant recovery from the trauma of the horrors of war. I've been in many ayahuasca ceremonies with veterans who were there specifically because they struggled with PTSD and have known some to do far, far better afterwards as a result of their experiences. So I would say it's not so much, how do I want to say this? All of the psychedelics in the right circumstances can be beneficial for PTSD. And I personally don't think there's anything wrong at all with what you were just talking about in terms of utilizing something. I mean, if you take, for example, if you've got indigestion and you drink ginger tea, you're taking that ginger tea for indigestion. That's okay. That's what it's for. It may also be fabulous as a seasoning and a decongestant and help to kill the cold virus and on and on and on, anti-inflammatory for the joints. But at that moment, you're taking it for an upset stomach. A lot of people go to psychedelics for therapeutic purposes that are specific. Women who've been sexually molested when they were young, men too, but more women, people who've undergone terrible events that have scarred their minds and really impeded their ability to just be joyful and happy in life. And I think that purposeful use is totally appropriate. But I would also comment on something you said earlier. Man, there is nothing wrong with doing mushrooms and watching silly movies and laughing your face off,
Yeah.
because that is also inspiring, cleansing, joyful, wonderful. I mean, when you look at the 30-year trip that was the Grateful Dead concerts,
Yeah.
with thousands and thousands and thousands of people tripping at every concert, and most of them very good experience, that became this joyful, bonding thing that really had to do with, the music and the community. So I happen to be one of those people who, I don't want to see this just be either, serious in terms of ceremony or therapeutic in terms of eye shade, recliner, holding a therapist's hand, listening to lilting music in a dimly lit room, blah, blah, blah. For some people, that's going to be a lifesaver.
Yeah.
But, I would rather do acid and sit in the desert.
Yeah.
I'd much rather do that. And LSD is not as popular as it used to be, although it's way more popular over the past few years. But that is one of the great and certainly most heroic of all of the psychedelics. And deriving, as it does, from the nucleus of, ergot fungus, specific fungus, it is, you'd say it's semi-synthetic because it also derives from a natural agent without which it could not be made.
You bring up so many good points, and I'm glad you brought up, watching comedy movies. And I'll say this, during that experience when I was 17 years old, I definitely bonded with my friend more than I ever had before prior to that.
And you had tears rolling down your face.
100%.
Yeah. See, that's the thing, is that these are boundary shattering agents. The word refresh is one I like to use relative to these kinds of experiences. I'm not talking about tripping every day, but periodically taking a nice big deep dive into the deep end of the pool off the high board and just having that experience and letting go and being in the right situation and hopefully with lovely people can be cleansing, refreshing, healing, inspiring, energizing. And, just like you shower every day. I mean, I hope you shower every day.
Sure do. Even though I'm a dirty hippie, yeah.
But, whatever it is, there are these things that we do basically to refresh and cleanse ourselves. And psychedelics play a wonderful role that way with daily life.
I was actually going to ask you how often, well, I'm not saying do you prescribe, but in your opinion, what do you think a frequency would be good for someone to be taking heroic doses of, say, mushrooms is? I used to do this thing where I'd say I would do mushrooms quarterly, it's just to remind myself of all of the beauty in the universe. Do you like that quarterly concept, or what are your thoughts on that?
I like that was your concept.
Okay.
I know a guy who once a year does a couple hundred micrograms of LSD, and he's been doing that for decades. He does that once a year. I know people who are regularly on weekends and other times involved with ayahuasca groups, and they do ceremony together. There are other people who say, about every 6 months or so, I do mushrooms or I do this or that. It is, if you have a best sense of timing for yourself, and that's based on your experience of refreshing yourself, of, just whatever it is, getting more of a groove on again, however it is that you cognize that for yourself, that's your sense of timing. Mm-hmm. That's a good one. I leave it up to the person.
Very individual.
Yeah, definitely so. Definitely so. I mean, when I was a teenager, which was when I did most of the LSD that I took over about a 4-year period, I was doing it very, very frequently. Um, I haven't done a tripping dose of LSD in years. Just haven't. I do some micro dosing, but so it depends. At the time, it just seemed like a real need, and all of my friends in the community and the whole hippie scene and acid rock and everything just pouring out of every speaker from all directions. That was a thing we did.
Hmm.
I don't do that now. My sense of timing has changed.
Sure. Yeah. I was just going to say that actually is it used to be quarterly for me, and I haven't done it quarterly in a long time. And I guess it just depends on the life stage you're at, your previous experience with it, and so on. You did bring up microdosing, and I also wanted to ask you about that. What are the benefits of microdosing? Whether I haven't honestly heard about microdosing with LSD. It's very popular with mushrooms. But I will say, at one time, I thought I was getting a microdose of LSD, and it turned out to be a macrodose. And I was tripping for a very long time. So I guess it depends on how it's titrated. I don't know if that's the right word for that or not. But just microdosing in general? What's your take on, say, the health benefits, depending on which psychedelic you're using?
Well, I would refer to the work of James Fadiman, who is
Okay.
kind of the king of microdosing, a contemporary of Timmy Leary, very, very much in the earlier, the nascent period of the psychedelic boom in the 60s, a real pioneer. He has a protocol that he has tracked a lot of people who microdose according to his protocol, which is you microdose one day, then you wait 2 days, then you do it again. Small amounts of different possible psychedelics. And he has found this very helpful for people with exactly the kinds of things we've been talking about.
Hmm.
Habits that they want to break, things they want to change in themselves, traumas that they can't seem to shake, and on. And I think for many people, this is a good and friendly way to utilize these medicines. Keep in mind, LSD was made at Sandoz Laboratories, okay, in Switzerland as a pharmaceutical drug. And ibogaine was a pharmaceutical in the U.S. for decades and decades for treating addiction. And other agents that are psychedelics have also had a long history of pharmaceutical use for specific medical purposes. MDMA, which is not a psychedelic, but ecstasy, Molly, as some people call it, that's a 1938 Merck pharmaceutical methamphetamine. That's what that is.
Hmm.
Heroin was invented by Bayer. The biggest coke dealer, maybe in all of U.S. history, was Park Davis.
Hmm.
Okay, they had dozens and dozens and dozens of popular cocaine-based products on the general market, lollipops for kids. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
So there's always been a pharmaceutical association with psychoactive agents. There never hasn't been. But I think that getting back to microdosing,
Sure.
it definitely shows to be very valuable for many people. So I just admire it, and I appreciate that there are folks out there doing that work.
So you've brought up MDMA a couple times. First of all, I'm kind of curious if you could kind of teach us where it's derived from. But besides that, I always heard of Molly or MDMA as like, say, like a cuddle drug. I was always kind of turned off by it. And then just to be kind of, transparent here, I actually have recently tried it with some friends. It was a mind-blowing experience for me, and in many ways I feel like it helped me address a lot of my PTSD, insecurities, and so forth. And it just really blew me away in that sense, because I thought it was just going to be like this thing where everyone wants to just cuddle on a pillow or something like that. And I've heard you mention before it's not actually a psychedelic, and it is synthetic, presumably. Also, I want to speak to, I was talking to someone recently about MDMA, and they said, well, sometimes it could be laced with fentanyl. So you got to be incredibly, discerning with where you purchase it or how you get it. It does seem to be rising in popularity in scientific studies for beneficial for people with PTSD. I would just love to have you kind of expound upon your opinions on MDMA synthetics and whether it's a psychedelic or not. And yeah, just that's a lot I'm throwing at you, Chris, but curious your thoughts.
MDA was developed by Merck Pharmaceuticals, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies on earth, in 1938. It is a methamphetamine.
Yeah.
Okay, it's stimulant by nature, but it has some very unusual properties that make it what people refer to as an empathogen. Giving you a much, much greater sense of the experience of others, perhaps even having that experience of the boundaries between others and yourselves is kind of like dissolved. It's sort of all one human love soup in a way. It shows great benefit for people with PTSD. And that's one of the reasons that MAPS has been working so hard.
Approved for veterans of different wars.
In general, veterans get put on antidepressants that don't work. They get put on anti-anxiety drugs that make them anxious. They get put on a variety, a cocktail of different drugs that not only don't rid them of PTSD, but often don't even really help them to manage that PTSD at all, just puts them in a different state of mind. MDA is different from that. It can have profound beneficial effects. And no, it's not a true psychedelic, but that doesn't matter. I would say, the era of MDMA therapy is very much on the rise. And there are many more clinical settings where it's being used. And we do see a loosening up of some restrictions, certainly a loosening up of law enforcement with regard to the psychedelics these days. People are much more concerned about bombs and poisons. So I have good regard for it. The 2 times that I took MDMA, took ecstasy, I was with, each time I was with 3 other people. And they all had wonderful experiences. And I didn't really have any particular experience at all on the same stuff. So I spent the time making them tea, massaging their feet, et cetera. But no, I in the scheme of things, it's a very, very good and promising medicine, and people do have wonderful experiences with it. So the supply side, that's hard to give any great advice with, because you've got everything out there. You've got clean products being made by diligent, thoughtful, capable people, and you've got crummy products that are adulterated with things that people shouldn't be swallowing. You've got it all.
Do you have hope for the legalization of these psychedelics and, say, MDMA in the near future? Do you think it's going to be a long time? For instance, I'm from Oregon, where cannabis is ubiquitous, but I live in Wisconsin now, where it's still illegal, which just is crazy to me. But do you have hopes that a lot of these psychedelics will be legalized in the near future?
Well, I think they'll be decriminalized.
Okay.
Is what I think. And different states, different municipalities have already done some of this. I'm surrounded by a couple of towns here in Western Massachusetts that have decriminalized many of the psychedelics. So if you want to do mushrooms, it's legal there. I mean, it's not federally legal there, but the feds aren't pounding people's doors down to see if they're doing mushrooms. I do think that the climate is changing. It has changed radically since the harsh crackdown of the 70s, when it was just brutal, and people were given these insane and absurd and obscene prison sentences for possessing small amounts of psychedelics, as though somehow they were demon spawn, when really these are among the greatest medicines in the world. And if you spend time with indigenous people, like I've spent a lot of time in the South Pacific in kava culture. You bought my book, Kava: Medicine Hunting in Paradise. Um, at the top of the whole botanical scheme in that culture is kava. Kava is not a psychedelic, but it is a significant, powerful, fast-acting, mood-modifying plant. And people drink kava made from freshly pounded kava root in the afternoons, and they sit around and talk. And they typically drink it out of a coconut shell. And I saw you out at Pangy Point today. Were you fishing? You talk about that stuff, and I tell you, oh yeah, I just got a pig from so and so over in Bay Martelli. That kind of thing. You go back and forth, and it's a way of building kinship and community. But it's the number one medicine in the islands. You go to the vast, vast Amazon rainforest with its many nations and its huge acreage, although I'm sad that it's being burned down, cut down, mowed down, otherwise destroyed as fast as people can do it. The number one medicine is ayahuasca, which is a potion.
2 different plants. And it's the only
psychedelic agent made from 2 different plants. One, a vine that's known as the vine of the soul, and a leaf that contains DMT. And you put them together, and it's only when they're put together, and you cook them in water, and you cook it down, and you get this sludge that I assure you tastes really nasty. And typically it's drunk in a ceremonial setting, often officiated by a shaman who specializes in these kinds of ceremonies, and it's a healing journey. And of all the plants, of the thousands of medicinal plants in the Amazon rainforest, some of which have anti-cancer properties, some of which are very, very serious medicines, and many of which have yielded some of the most popular pharmaceuticals of all time, ayahuasca is number one. And it is because these are considered soul medicines. Yes, if you've had a mysterious stomach problem for years and years and years and years, it may be that a couple of nights of ayahuasca, it will never come back, because that has been deeply rooted in something going on in your psyche. But it is also the case that these are profound soul medicines. You go deep, 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 deep into your essential self. You may have splendid visions. You may have no visions. You may have weird, unpleasant visions in some ceremonies. Anything can happen, but it's a journey. And the journey is highly regarded by indigenous healers. And you see that same thing, for example, in the mountains of southern Mexico, where really mushroom culture first became kind of popularly known. Those people take this very seriously. I mean, yes, you can go there and just buy some mushrooms and trip and stare at the mountains, but there are people who officiate ceremonies, and those ceremonies may be, 5-6 hours long, and may be quite heroic in terms of the amount of mushrooms that people take. And that is considered the highest possible medicine in the region. So these not only are often used ceremonially, but of all the hundreds or maybe even thousands of medicines in a region, unfailingly, these will be at the apex of that botanical pyramid.
You mentioned ayahuasca as 2 plants in the Amazon, and I'm curious, out of the thousands of medicinal plants that grow there, do these 2 plants grow somewhat close to each other? And do you have, in your travels, do you have any lore or stories of how the indigenous people figured out that it actually creates this amazing psychedelic?
Well, here's the thing. You've got at least 80,000 leafy plants in the Amazon. And about 10,000.
Diverse.
Yeah, about 10,000 of them are vines. And you've got all these bushes that have leaves. And yet it's a very specific vine and a very specific leaf that's used to make ayahuasca. And there are scientists who will say, well, it's obviously trial and error, which is such a silly, laughable concept. It just defies belief, okay? There's no way. I mean, it's something like a 16 billion to 1 possibility that you could come up with that combination. It's not likely. But you ask the shamans and they say, well, the plants told us, of course.
Oh, I got goosebumps.
And, the first time I had the plants told us experience, I was with this woman shaman named Edna on the Amazon River in Brazil. And she said, I want to do something for you. I want to read you. So she disappeared. She went out the back of her little shack and she came back with this little plant. And it was really small. It was this big and it had little roots coming off of it. And she held it by the stalk and she started touching me on the shoulders and head and doing a little chant. And then she stopped and she told me about a very specific problem I was having in my business, something she could not have known. And it wasn't a general thing that you could make up, like, oh, you're attracted to a woman. There was none of that stuff, okay? This was very specific. And I said to her, Edna, how do you know this? And she laughed and she said, I don't know it. The plant still has its roots. See?
That goes here and then
goes here. Now do you understand? And of course I said, oh, okay, yeah, sure. Communication with these agents, it's just like a perfumer blindfolded can identify maybe 3,000 scents. Try it.
Yeah.
Try it after 25. Okay, it's not that easy. But a finely attuned, capable, experienced, seasoned perfumer can do that. The native people who work with plants, it's not just that they go out and pick them and they boil them. They become intimately involved with the plants. They become intimately involved with the environment. They become intimately involved with the forest. First time I ever hiked in the forest in the Brazilian Amazon, we were going along and the guy went, we don't go there. Yeah. And I said, why? And he said, snake. He was smelling a particular type of poisonous snake, probably the scat. Wow. But he was smelling it. I didn't smell it, just smelled like the forest to me. But he was so attuned and had been in that forest since he was a little boy and knew the sights and the sounds and the smells and the everythings about it, that he goes, no, we don't go over there. Let's go this way. Okay. So the shamans say, well, the plants told us to put them together, because what you have to do to make ayahuasca, you take a big pot, you take a bunch of the fresh vine, you pack it into the bottom of the pot, then you take a great big huge handful of the fresh green Psychotria viridis leaves and you make a layer, then another layer of vine, then another layer of leaf, vine, leaf. Then you fill the thing to the top with water over a fire and you cook it down for about 8 hours. And then you strain it and then you keep evaporating it. And eventually you've got this thick, dark sludge. There is just no way on earth that is a trial and error thing. Okay. We know a lot in our current culture. We have a lot of sensibilities and sensitivities that, that are extraordinary. I mean, we can use all kinds of technology that have utterly changed the course of history and just do it like that. It's so automatic. Look at what we're doing right now. Okay. Native people have vast skills related to nature, and they get a lot of stuff figured out plant-wise. I used to go see this woman. I saw her a few times. Rosa Martinez, very, very poor woman, lived in the forest in the Chanchamayo region of the eastern slopes of the Andes going down into the Amazon. And after people gave up hope with their doctors in La Merced or San Mateo, in that area, they would go out to Rosa Martinez and she would cure them. And she'd go out into the forest and she'd come back with different plants. And some of her treatments were bizarre, like she had this one guy with crippling arthritis when he started going to her. And she used to make him get naked, wrap himself in a shower curtain, and stand over a boiled pot of particular herbs. And he would stand there and sweat and turn red and suffer. He got rid of his arthritis.
Wow.
Some of these healers, and not all of them, are very, very, very fine doctors. And the plants do communicate with them in some manner that you and I don't have the same skills. But for them, it's just a given,
What's your take on the popularity of ayahuasca and, say, ayahuasca tourism? You were speaking earlier about the sustainability of the ayahuasca plants. Just kind of curious what you think about, a bunch of people from, say, the United States traveling over to Peru or wherever to take this ayahuasca. Is there a sustainability problem? Is there any sort of like cultural things we should be aware of or concerned about? What's your take on that?
I wrote a book called The Ayahuasca Test Pilot's Handbook, which goes through a lot of this. And I see that people carry it in their backpacks when they go to ayahuasca places. But, I have gone to ayahuasca centers where people show up to experience.
I brought groups there. My wife and I have done that.
Probably about 65 shamans in the general Peruvian Iquitos area, and have sat with them. And what I think is that it's a mixed bag.
Okay.
You have, on the one hand, this is a powerful thing. Shamanism was on the decline. If you read a lot of work from the 70s and 80s and 90s, from anthropologists, they're talking about how, young people in native communities were abandoning shamanism. It was well known they were going into cities to become taxi drivers and chambermaids in hotels and that kind of thing. What an awful existence. And the interest in ayahuasca and the interest in that form of healing has revived shamanic practice in a big, big way. So now there are many more people saying, yeah, I'm going to stay and learn from my granny and do the 12 years that I need to really know this medicine. It's very obvious now that I can make a living and raise a family doing that. And I can stay in my village with my friends and still go fishing. And it's been very, very beneficial in that regard. You definitely have people who are, as you would say, tourists. They want another notch in their psychedelic belt. But my experience is most people go because they hope to heal something. And in general, I think it's quite positive. It has led to some people calling themselves shamans who aren't shamans. We've seen some sexual abuse in some of these places, and that's just awful. A couple of deaths from people doing irresponsible things with tobacco ceremonies. But overall, in general, if you look at, for example, the Santo Daime Church, the largest ayahuasca-based church in the world, based in Brazil with hundreds of thousands of followers who do this all the time, or you look at some of the other large União de Vegetal, another Brazilian ayahuasca-based church, or many of these centers who have people coming through all the time, mostly it's about healing. And my experience in ceremonies in the Amazon, and I've done some, in the shack, like beside somebody's house, beside a swamp with chickens sitting there, while the shaman's singing, and I've done that too. But I think overall it's a very positive thing. In places right along rivers, right, easily accessible by boats, where there was, say, a lot of vine, in many of those places, that's gone. But I've researched with my team basically the ayahuasca breadbasket of Peru, which is down a river that most people will never, ever go down, called the Rio Tamaya. And the ayahuasca vine there is so vast and so profuse and so everywhere that at least as of 2019, I have to say there was not a sustainability problem. And on top of that, a lot of smart people are cultivating vine. A lot of smart people. I've met many shamans who are doing it. In Hawaii, it's a big thing. I talk about cultivating the vine because the leaf is comparably easy. It's like planting a blueberry bush. The leaf that you plant this bush, it grows profusely with leaves. You pick them, more come up. It's relatively easy. So at this point in time, I would say that if you survey the whole scene, and I'm not just talking coastal villages along rivers, you'll find that it's reasonably sustainable and getting more so for the number of people who are now cultivating these plants.
That's very encouraging. I wasn't sure what you were going to say there. So yeah, lots of food for thought there. Chris, I want to be respectful of your time. Do you have time for a couple more questions?
Absolutely.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, then this could be a quick answer. I'm just kind of curious. Do you have any non-psychedelic plant allies?
Oh yeah, I get called by the plants all the time. I heard the word maca one time around 1995, and I couldn't get it out of my head.
Wow.
And I wound up 3 years later up in the Peruvian Andes, and I've been involved with maca ever since.
Maca is basically a traditional Andean food that's
very energizing, and a lot of people use maca root powder in smoothies and that kind of thing. And there are extracts out there too. Berkem now has one. But that was a huge draw. Panax ginseng. I went to Heilongjiang a couple of times. That's the farthest northeastern province in China, Black River Dragon Province, as it's known, and investigated ginseng there, and also eleuthero, which some people call Siberian ginseng. I was very, very drawn to Rhodiola rosea, which it may be my overall favorite non-psychedelic plant. A powerful adaptogen, helps to reduce stress, enhance energy, strength, endurance, stamina, mental clarity, immune function, cardiovascular function, respiratory function. It's one of those great, great herbs. I went to Siberia for that.
Wow.
And then I went back to the Tian Shan mountain region in Xinjiang, China, where China is currently oppressing the Uyghur people and committing genocide and putting them in prison in this awful situation. But, I was called to go pretty far out there. Coffee, which is something I love, just love. I have investigated all over the world. You put me in a coffee plantation, just leave me there. I'm happy. Whether it's West Africa or it's Vietnam or it's Vanuatu or wherever. So yeah, the plants definitely call to me in a manner. It's like a little hook in the mind. And there's just that sort of tug periodically. And I first experienced kava. I was at a dinner party in 1979, and a friend of, all herbalists, right?
Yep.
Everybody's got extracts and things. We just made a new ginger extract, and we're trying oh man, that's really good. Hey, we just made the first ever bee pollen extract. It was that kind of thing. And a friend pulled out a little jar, and he stuck a chopstick into it and came up with this blob of black goo and said, "Try this." And I said, What the heck, Andy? What is this you're giving me? And he says, "There's something you're really going to like a lot." And anyway, I took this blob, I put it in my mouth, I let it kind of dissolve a little bit, I swallowed it, and in a matter of a minute, I got this beautiful, tranquil feeling. And I said, is this stuff legal? And he says, absolutely. And I was hooked. And even though I didn't, I eventually wound up getting the same little jar from a place in Hilo, Hawaii that he had gotten it from. But it led me to doing extensive research in Vietnam. In Vanuatu, South Pacifically, fire walking there with natives 6 years in a row, going on amazing boat rides, going to remote villages, having spectacular times because of the call of this plant. So I think that for those of us who are deeply immersed in the botanical world, and there are lots and lots of people who are, it sounds like you are one of them, there's this pull, there's this lure, there's this something that just calls to us. And in some cases, it's a real nag. It doesn't stop until you finally just go and do the thing. Whatever that. I felt that way about ayahuasca. As soon as I ever first heard about it, it was just a thing in my mind. And then eventually, many years later, 14 years after I first started traveling in the Amazon, 14 years, I finally experienced it. But every single time I was trying to find it, I was just in the wrong place and I didn't know where to go.
Thank you for sharing all that. 2 more questions. This one's probably pretty simple. I've always been curious, how does one watch the show The Medicine Hunter? It looks like you're the ethnobotanist version of an Anthony Bourdain type of guy, and I would love to see some of these episodes. I couldn't find it on your YouTube. Is there a place you could get it, like DVDs or whatever?
There are two feature-length shows on my website under the title
Asia, and one is in
Peruvian Andes.
Okay.
What you saw on my YouTube channel was one of a few different teaser reels done by production companies.
Okay.
I was on Fox News Health for 9 years as the Fox News Medicine Hunter.
Okay.
I did the Oz show like 15 times. I was a regular there and on their advisory board. And I've done about 500 or so TV programs, large and small. Some it's just 3-minute spots on the daily news. Done a lot of TV internationally, traveled with crews. I participated in documentaries, but I never did get the Medicine Hunter TV series.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I always wanted. I still wound up doing a hilarious amount of TV. But so you can't actually watch that, but you can see 2 feature medicine trail TV shows on my YouTube channel.
Amazing. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you. And, Chris, last question. Let's make it kind of like an inspirational thing. You've lived such a beautiful, adventurous life. Maybe there's like, say, an herbalist who's just getting their life, their career going. What kind of words of advice would you give that person who wants to lead kind of a similar life as you have led thus far?
Well, spend time with plant lovers, spend time with the plants, make connections. I think there are 2 or 3 ways to go to do the kind of work I do. One is to become expert enough that companies will want you for your expertise. Another is to align with, something like one of the great botanical gardens, Missouri, Kew, New York Botanical Garden, Atlanta, maybe, early on starting out interning and eventually kind of growing into those places because they're always sending people out into the field. And then I think a third is NGOs, non-government organizations that, work on different dimensions of plants. I found long ago that if I followed my love, if I followed what I really cared about, that one way or another, I would come into circumstances that helped me to express myself more that way. That's just how it has worked for me. I don't know how it necessarily works for other people, but I've met a lot of people who have started out kind of wandering around, not really with a set plan, and have wound up doing very fine work and having good lives and good careers in this field in general.
What a great way to wrap up the show. Chris, this has been an honor. I'm very inspired. I got a lot out of it. I know the audience will as well. Any last closing thoughts before we wrap up and get out of here?
I think that today, given that there's so much emphasis on artificial intelligence, we need to remember that it's thanks to natural intelligence that we're alive. It's thanks to the miracle that plants eat light. They eat light and they grow. Yeah. And they give us oxygen. And we eat them, we drink their juices, we make homes out of them, we make clothing out of them, we make furniture out of them, we use them for fuel, we do, for decoration, for ornamentation, we get their fragrances and wear those. We could not be more involved with anything as we are with plants. We share biology. The same antioxidants that protect plant cells protect our cells. Many of the vascular plants, the things flow through them in a circulatory manner just as they do in the body. We are totally and completely connected with the plants. And I would encourage people to spend more time paying attention to natural intelligence, the water, the sky, the beautiful landscapes that still exist, knowing that the AI is going to come along even more strongly than it already has and be, humongous in our lives and completely alter the course of history. But I would advise people to stick much more close to
natural intelligence.
Chris, thank you so much. For the audience, that's medicinehunter.com. Everything that we talked about will be in the podcast show notes, YouTube description, etc. Thanks once again, Chris. Thanks to y'all for tuning into the Herbalist Hour, and we'll see you next week.
Bless
Bye,
you,
everybody.
Really good care. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for watching today's episode of the Herbalist Hour. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. And if you want more great herbal content, be sure to subscribe to our HerbRally YouTube channel. If you enjoy these Herbalist Hour episodes and you'd like to join us live, you can do so by becoming an HerbRally Schoolhouse member. Learn more at herbrally.com/schoolhouse. And if you want to get your first 30 days for free, use coupon code YouTube30 at checkout. So our HerbRally Schoolhouse members get access to exclusive video classes, monographs, and a lot more herbal community discounts, along with joining these live Herbalist Hour interviews. So one more time, herbrally.com/schoolhouse. Enter coupon code YouTube30 at checkout to get your first 30 days for free. All right, we'll see you in the next episode and take care.